Hey everyone, this is Ryan Robinson here. If you haven't seen me on before, I'm one of the guys who does a lot of the work behind the scenes with the podcast, and just wanted to jump on before some of these podcasts coming up to ask if you would be willing to give us some feedback about what is and what is not working with the podcast so far. So we've set up a survey on the website, and if you have a couple minutes before or after this podcast, just jump over to mennonerds.com/podcasts/survey and you'll be able to fill it out there, and that'll help us figure out what we can keep doing from here on. Thank you.
Hi there, this is Steve Kimes. I'm a pastor in Portland, Oregon.
And my name is Ebony Adedayo. I'm a pastor in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the founder of the Kinky Theological Collective.
And this is Steve Kimes Feeling Inadequate. And this is BGWG, Black Gal, White Guy, where a black gal from Minnesota and a white guy from Oregon have conversations about social justice and theology. So today, our subject is mission. But first, let's talk about our recommendations. So, Ebony, what have you got to recommend to everyone?
Absolutely. So I've been saying over the last couple of broadcasts that I am the founder of the Kinky Theological Collective. And I just wanted to offer that up as a resource on our time today. The Kinky Theological Collective is an intentional space for African and African American women to do self-care and healing, to do deep study and reflection of our culture, our experience, and our just who we are in the world, but to also be a space of theological production and knowledge production as well. One of the things I have found in my experience being in seminary and theological education is that the experience of Black women is often otherized. If it's not in a supplemental text, it's not in the text altogether unless they're being talked about and demonized. The purpose of this organization that I'm starting is to really lift up the narrative of African and African American women and really use it as a valid place in which to do theology, not from an otherization standpoint, but as a critical piece to our life and community as believers. The launch party for this organization is tomorrow, so I'm really deeply excited about it. But I just want to share it and promote it as something that's wonderful happening in the world. In the midst of all of the yucky chaos, this is good and this is happening.
That's really great. That is really great to have a place where you can communicate. So let me ask you, okay, so this is a place for African American women to get together and talk theology and to have it out and not to feel like they have to be interrupted and not to feel other. So can white males lurk as long as we promise to stay quiet?
Nope. This is nothing against white males. And so I should correct you, it's African and African American women. I really want to emphasize the need to build partnerships and alliances across the African diaspora. So I want to be intentional in naming not just our experience here in America, but our experience as African American women in the world, as there are many differences, but there's so many different similarities. The reason I say no, and no for other identities as well, because so often Black women don't have this space. I want to be careful and intentional about creating this space. I would love people to come alongside of us and support us so that we can have this space. But there is a need to do some intentional work and really focus on Black women. I want to build alliances across all sorts of identities, so not just white men, but other women of color as well. But I want to be intentional in how we start and how we ground this work in the experience or knowledge of Black and African women.
That's really great. No, that is fantastic, and it's not like white men don't have other places in the internet to go. My recommendation is actually one that you brought up, Ebony, early in the podcast. I was actually looking through my book recommendations on Audible, and I saw a book, and it seemed familiar. And I looked at it and said, "Oh yeah, Ebony mentioned that one. It's called The Body Keeps the Score." And I said, "Oh, well, I'll check it out," because Ebony seemed to think of it as a primer on trauma. And I'm like, okay, I could definitely use that. So, wow. Oh my goodness, it is so good. Now I listened to the audiobook. I loved it so much that I told my wife, "Well, you have to read this book." And I knew that the only way she was going to read it is if I got an actual copy. So I got my copy today. And she decided, she says, "Oh, you're podcasting, so I'm going to leave." And she's walking away, and she's, "Wait, what about that book that you got me?" And I said, "Well, I need to show it on the podcast." And she's just like, "Oh, okay, all right." So she's all ready to read it. And oh my goodness, I want everyone to read this. This is an amazing book. It is. I learned so much about trauma and treatment. It is amazing. I mean, this is going to change how I do ministry, especially among the houseless, but it's also going to change how I treat myself. The thing is that so often dealing with people who are traumatized is going to cause trauma in your life. And so with so much going on with so many different people who are mentally ill and traumatized and houseless, and all of these and severe poverty and abuse, it's going to change how I treat other people in my ministry and change how I treat myself. It is written by I am really going to mess up this name, Bessel van der, no, I'm not even going to do it. You see, it looks like that. The Body Keeps the Score. It's the only book out there with that name. Okay.
That's true.
Anyway.
Can I briefly, you said something that I just want to offer another resource as a result of you saying that, a really brief one. You talked about as a result of working with traumatized people and working around trauma and specifically calling out trauma, that it in and of itself is a traumatizing effect and event. In that vein, one of the things that I have realized in some of the work that I'm doing is not only a need for my own self-care, which is really important, but a need for my own systems and spaces where I can get the healing that I need. And so in the last couple of weeks, I have started therapy. So I want to lift that up as a resource as well. I know we live in a culture where there's lots of different mental illnesses and just lots of different trauma going on. I think sometimes therapy is still taboo, even among believers, especially among believers, because we have this mind frame that if we can just pray and we go to church and we do our devotions and we do all these other things, that we will be well and we won't have to deal with some of these things that the rest of society is dealing with. And it's a lie. It's a lie from the pit of hell, because we do have to deal with the rest of the things that society is dealing with, no matter how hard we pray. And so I just want to emphasize the need for those who do need help. Pray and then get off your knees and go to the therapist or psychologist or whomever else is a professional who can help you out. People get trained and spend thousands of hours practicing to help others be well. And so find a resource. If you're having trouble finding a resource, email Steve or I and we could help you find a resource. But know that there are tools and there's systems out there to support those who really need it. And I just strongly recommend it as a resource. I have recently tapped into it. Again, I've taken therapy at different periods in my life. Right now is one, I need one right now because of things that are going on that are beyond my control at work and stuff. And in society is traumatizing. So end of soapbox speech right there.
Well, and I totally agree with you. And I've been off and on seeing therapists. In fact, actually, I've been wanting to sign up with a therapist, and then my clinic didn't have one, and now they're going to have one at the end of the month. And I said that, okay, now I'm going to be able to do it. Oh, now I just got cut off of my insurance. So now I'm in kind of in limbo. But the thing is one thing that I learned is that one of the mental health groups that have a lot of social workers working with people who are mentally ill, or they are uh, or developmentally disabled, but they're functioning in society. They have these social workers. One of the things is every one of those social workers is required to go to therapy, because they, just in hearing the stories of other people, and listen, pastors, this is you too, just in constantly hearing the stories of people in trauma, of people with abuse, we get a little bit of that every time that we hear a story. And we need to be able to have a place to process it with well. And it doesn't have to be therapy. We may be able to process with other people, or maybe our denomination might have something to help us with that process. But still, we need to actively seek out and to work that out in our lives. So I totally affirm what you're saying there. Back to the real quick. Back to the book. Just the body keeps the score. This guy has seen treatment fads come and go. He goes into real depth about treatments on trauma, and what works and what doesn't work, and what works for who, and there are different kinds of trauma, and what will work for this and what will work for that. Man, highly recommend this book. I would have let it go with just the therapy thing, but I really want to recommend this book. If you're saying, well, I don't know that I want to do therapy, read this book. And you're saying, well, I am in therapy, read this book. Okay, got it? Okay, now let's get to the subject of our. The subject is today about mission. So, Ebony, last I checked in the Bible, Jesus has some important things to say about mission. He said, go, make disciples of all nations. He says, go to all creation and preach the gospel. Paul, he was an important guy in the New Testament. He went to the Gentiles. He made converts. Mission is an integral part of the New Testament. One could say that the book of Acts is all about mission. That's the whole thing. But in the modern day, mission is problematic. There's some issues. We'll talk about that in a minute. But now, personally, I've been to India, and I went to Bangladesh, and I trained in mission in my seminary, and I approached the homeless as a mission. That's kind of, in a nutshell, kind of my background with mission. What is your connection to mission?
I had no idea that you trained in missions in seminary. So did I. That is actually my degree is global and contextual studies, and so when I came to Minnesota in 2001, I started off as a missions major and music minor, and really wanted the opportunity to preach. And so I decided to have a pastoral major and a missions minor. And then when I went to seminary, I started off as an MDiv. And after having an opportunity to go to Africa, and specifically Rwanda, the DRC, and Kenya, when I came back, I switched from having an MDiv to missions focus. In addition to going to Africa, I've been to parts of Central and South America, namely El Salvador, Guatemala, and Argentina. I've also been to England, Manchester specifically. I think those are all of the places and parts of the world I've been. I've never been to Asia or to Australia. And I have not been outside of the country since my husband captured me. I blame it all on him. All of that to say that since I was 16, up until fairly recently, missions have been a big piece of my life. I come from a denomination where missions like Speed the Light and supporting missionaries was very, very critical to who we were as a denomination. In addition to that, prior to being in the church that I am at, from about 2010 to 2012, I served as a missions pastor at the former church that me and my husband attended. And so missions has been a huge part of my framework for a very, very long time. I agree, and I'm sure you have other questions in regards to this. I agree with you wholeheartedly. The focus around the New Testament, around going and spreading the gospel and preaching the good news, and don't take away from the importance of doing that at all. As you mentioned, in today's times, it is problematic, not because of the desire to spread Jesus and talk about the gospel itself, but because of how we do that and how so often the act of doing that comes along with this American branded colonization and civilization that dehumanizes other parts of the world. So I'll leave it there so you can ask more questions.
Okay, well, my next question actually has to do with the connection between mission and colonization. I mean, mission is historically connected to colonization, people going to other countries, using religion to convert as a part of conquering them. And at the time, there was no disconnect there. The conquering was said, oh, this is part of the mission that we're doing, and mission was a part of the conquering. So is mission indelibly connected to colonialization?
I think that so far, well, not so far, I think because over the last few centuries, it has been that it's hard to separate the two. You have to remember when Christianity has been used as a weapon against marginalized groups for a very long time. And I want to talk about specifically Christianity because I know religion in general has been. Walter Brueggemann, if you've never read his book Prophetic Imagination, has this really good illustration about how religion has been used by those in power to push their propaganda. So it's not just about Christianity, but there's facets of Islam that have done this, Hinduism that have done this. Wherever you see places of power, they have used the religion or non-religion of that place to push a particular propaganda. Since we're talking about missions, I want to be specific in talking about Christianity and how king and queen in Spain signed that edict to really validate the doctrine of discovery. You know, to say that it was okay to come to America and it was okay to do what people did to American Indians. They did the same thing with colonizing Africa as well, that it was okay for people from these European places to go and colonize these other spaces because they were barbarians and because they didn't know the Lord. And so often throughout our Christian history over the last 500 years, to be quite frank, the cross has come with the sword. And a lot of countries, a lot of places, that has been the case. And so now that you're trying to make a distinguish, and so the cross may not come with a sword anymore, but it definitely comes with an agenda for many people. It comes with an agenda around civilization, comes with an agenda around democracy. It comes with an agenda around ideology and way of being. I remember in seminary reading this book about split level Christianity, which talked about how in other parts of the world, Christianity often comes with its mixed bag of local beliefs and religious practices as well. We assume in America that our brand of Christianity isn't does not do that and isn't syncretistic, but it's highly syncretistic. And so when we come to other countries, we come with an American branded Christianity and not the Christianity that was espoused by Jesus and the apostles in the New Testament.
Well, let me just ask you, what are some examples of some of the, if we're syncretistic, what are some examples of the syncretism that we have? I mean, I can see some syncretism, for instance, in us seeing America as a Christian nation. That in and of itself is syncretism. But when we go to another country or we go to another culture, what are some examples of some syncretism that we might bring with us?
So we assume in America that the Constitution is gospel and that democracy is great, that capitalism is founded by God, that guns are great. These are our ideals that we hold on to, that you will hear pastors here in America in the same sermon talking about gun rights as they're talking about Jesus being raised from the dead. This brand of free trade and capitalism that we export over the world, not only through missions but through other things. I don't want to blame it all on the church or all on missions, because that's not fair. But we have to realize that the way that we interpret Christianity here in America is through the lens of this American exceptionalism, this American ideas of way of being around democracy, guns, patriotism, freedom and rights, and so many other things that if we are raised in this way of being, we will undoubtedly leak this to other parts of the world. So that when we are in Africa or India or anywhere else, we will say, oh, these people are not like Christ because they don't cherish gun rights, because they don't do XYZ and we do XYZ in America. And in America, Christianity is real. And so we have a huge amount of ethnocentrism when it comes to other countries already. But when you overlay the gospel on top of that, we somehow begin to see that ethnocentrism through a religious-based lens. And we have no other choice but to discriminate and to marginalize people because they don't fit that lens.
Is there a problem with gun rights or democracy? Are these problems that we hold these beliefs?
Yes, they're problems. Even if they're not problems, they have nothing to do with the gospel, though. And so my point is that when we preach the gospel and we go to Timbuktu or Sierra Leone or Ghana, we don't bring the gospel in its pure, unadulterated form. We bring the gospel with all of the American baggage behind it. And it takes someone who is really intentional, really strategic, really willing to be humble and learn from the local people in the context in which they're preaching the gospel to not do that.
You know, another thing that is a serious consideration is no matter where we go in the world, or no matter how humble we try to be, we are still Americans. I remember one time I went to Bangladesh, and I was in a little taxi going by, and the taxi was open. There was no windows, and some guy calls in. We were stopped at a stoplight, and some guy calls in and says, "Hey, you want a girl? I get you a girl. No problem. I get you a girl." I said, "No. I don't want a girl. I'm a Christian." "Oh, you want a Christian girl? I get you a Christian girl." Because for him, Christian is just a religion, you know? And so he was going to get me a Christian prostitute because he feared that's... But the thing is that no matter where we go in the world, we are Americans, and no matter where I went in the world, I still had the blonde hair and blue eyes and the genes that nobody else was going to be able to get easily. And no matter what it was that I said, my Christianity is tainted with the assumption that people see me as an American, and they see that I'm living a certain lifestyle as well. And I don't know how I can actually separate my Christianity from that.
Absolutely. And I mean, culture is powerful. Culture is extremely, extremely powerful. We have an American form of Christianity here, but you know what? In Nigeria, they have a Nigerian form of Christianity. And in India, they have an Indian form of Christianity. all that to say is that we are so much beholden to our culture. We are the good, the bad, the ugly, like all of it. We are deeply cultural and community beings. And so when we step into a different place, no, we cannot be completely humble, but we do need to take a cue from those who are in that space and learn from those who are in those places. Um, I have learned. So when I was in seminary, after I left seminary, I decided that instead of working in a church full time, that I wanted to work in a nonprofit and do community based work. I decided that because at the time I was not seeing any Christian ministries that were really explicit about racial and social justice, and I knew that that's what I needed for my life. So I went to work for a nonprofit. A nonprofit, which are not great, not perfect, none of those things. One of the greatest lessons that I have learned in my time in the nonprofit sector is just the value of community voice. So, for example, you have a campaign to raise the wage. As an organizer, you're going to Portland to work with the lower class and middle income people in that space to raise their wage. You, as an organizer, come from a place of power and privilege that you're able to do this work. You're going to this space that may not necessarily have the degree of privilege that you do with your whiteness, your middle classness, and your master's degree. In the work that I have done around community and organizing, one of the things I have really found really pivotal and really key to community-based work is that even when you are coming in with your degree of privilege, you have experience, you have knowledge or whatever, you're not smarter than the people who live that life day to day. You're not smarter than the people, you're not more experienced than the people who are struggling to put food on the table, who are struggling with homelessness or struggling with any other thing. They can speak to their issues around raising the wage better than you can with all of your experience and expertise. I say that to say, I think missions really needs to learn from grassroots organizing and community-based organizing because there is values there around raising and looking to community voice to be leaders on issues that many missiologists don't have. Many missiologists come into a context that is not theirs, assuming that they have all of the answers because they're white, they're right, and they have power and privilege behind their name. In many cases, they're not coming thinking, assuming, or believing that those in the places where they're going are experts in their own culture. Even if they believe in a different belief system, they come in with a lot of presumptions about who these people are and don't look to them and value them in many really meaningful ways. And so when I think about how we can do it better, because we're going to come with our baggage, we will. Me, as an African American woman, I only know America. I'm going to come with my baggage to any culture that I go into outside of America. Even if I go to Nigeria as a missionary, I'm going to come with American baggage and it's going to stink. As a missionary in that context or whatever context, I have to be willing to defer to the local leadership on the ground for every single thing that I do. Whether it comes to translation of materials, leadership, preaching, any other thing, it's not about me and my name and my expertise. Is about the name of Christ and making sure that his name is rooted in that context. Meaning that like Paul and like Jesus, I have to be intent on building disciples and leaders, but then also deferring to those disciples and leaders for so many different things.
Do you ever find, though, that when you're in that kind of context, that they are always wanting to defer to you? Oh, you're the expert. You're the one with the education. You're from America, so you should know. So we just want to ask you, what is it that you should do? Do you find that to be a difficulty?
So I could see how that can be challenging, and I have been in spaces where people assume that Americans have this corner on knowledge that we don't. We just have the corner on arrogance. So in those cases, I think that we need to be explicit about our role in those spaces. We're not coming to bring this wealth and body of knowledge. We're coming with the gospel in its pure, unadulterated form. We want to learn from people. Teach us. Teach us about your culture. Teach us about your way of being. Teach us. You're the experts. And I think those are messages that we need to begin to communicate. Many Americans don't communicate those messages. And so even by virtue of me going into a different culture, I already have a degree of power just because I am American, even though I'm Black. So I think people will assume certain things about me that may or may not necessarily be true. So I have to constantly correct those things and correct those assumptions. Like, no, I'm here to do this. And I need to continue to practice that. And I need to continue to be humble. And I need to continue to defer, even when others may not necessarily want me to do that. Because the thing about it is that there's not a precedent around doing that. Throughout mission history, we've been doing things the other way. So it may take some time to create a new way of being around missions. And so people may not necessarily get it yet because they're used to Americans coming in and setting up shop and doing things their way. And so by saying that we're going to do something different, we're changing things. All of this to say, there are so many dynamic movements of God going on in foreign countries that have nothing to do with America. We should support those movements. We should support the work that's going on the ground with the people who are there in their own culture, with their own language, their own tongue, their own way of being, rather than sending our missionaries to them. We need to support local efforts on the ground. It's cheaper because you don't have to pay for American missionaries trying to maintain their way of life and way of being in another culture. Is cheaper. It'll get the work done faster because they already have those connections. They don't have to do translation. They don't need an interpreter. They don't need to learn language or customs, learn about bathrooms and food and all those washing of hands and things like that because they're there. Also, it is once again valuing the leadership who's on the ground by equipping and supporting those who are already there. We are saying we value the people there. We value the leadership there. We value the culture. We value all the things that are there, and we just want to put our resources and our support behind supporting locally sourced missionaries.
That's really wise. Well, in our real time, it's really late, and so I think we're going to wrap it up for today. So this has been BGWG, and we just want to thank all of you listeners for you listening. We're really we would love to hear any kind of responses that you would have to say to us about missions or about outreach. If you've got some thoughts along these lines, or you really disagree with what we're saying, we'd be happy to listen to that. And also, we want to thank Ryan Robinson, who is editing and is so faithful in all of his work. And we just want to thank all the folks in MennoNerds for all the work we do. It's all volunteer, and it's a fun organization to be a part of. All right, then we're wrapping this up for this week. We just pray that the Lord would bless you and keep you and give you peace.
Hey everyone, this is Paul Walker. If you like what you just heard, be sure to check out more of what we have to offer at MennoNerds.com. It's the hub for all things MennoNerds. From there, you can learn more about these podcasts, syndicated blogs from people all over the world, books authored by some of our members, and a host of other exciting free resources for you and your church. Now, there's one last thing. What we do costs a bit of money, and we're always doing it on a volunteer basis. We have people that are committed to making this happen, but we could use more people. If you like what we do, please consider donating monthly. We have two options. You can either do a monthly donation through Patreon, or you can give a one-time donation at any time through PayPal. We love the work we do, but we do need your help to keep it going and to expand into new territory. If you would like to donate, check out MennoNerds.com/donate. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great day.